Welcome to the Sludge Factory podcast. We have a really cool guest sitting in with us today. If any of you listening have ever spent any time in the New York City metal club scene, or if you're one of the Lemorons who grew up hanging out at the famous metal club, this guy's probably an old friend to you. Legendary DJ Alex Kayne. He's here to talk about his new book. Welcome to the Sludge Factory, Alex.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure's all mine, sir. Thank you so much for stopping by. So you are writing this book about Lemurs, and we do want to talk about the book, but let's get right into it. You know, Lemurs, for those of you who don't know, Lemur was one of the major focal spots of the early metal scene in the early '80s. Without the club, there probably wouldn't be the thrash scene as we know it today. You were right there at the beginning. Talk about that transition, because Lemurs did start out as a disco club, and you guys were one of the first ones to start playing this heavier, aggressive new music.
That's exactly right. The club opened around November 1st, 1978, and it was a typical dyed-in-the-wool, John Travolta-esque Saturday Night Fever type discotheque with the railing around the dance floor and the whole polyester crowd doing the hustle. Rock nights there kind of started like on a lark. I mean, it was a kind of thing like, what should we do with Thursday nights? I don't know. Maybe we'll do some rock and roll and see what happens, kind of thing. And what was strange about it is that there was this sort of underpinning of a crowd that had no place to go. I mean, they had grown up with bands like Kiss and Sabbath and Deep Purple and bands like that, and I really had no place to hang around and see that kind of stuff live. And so Thursday nights, I believe it was Thursday nights started rock nights, and the crowd became so large very quickly that it spilled over into Fridays.
Right.
And then inside of a year, basically all the disco people had dispersed onto the other clubs in Bay Ridge and Brooklyn, which there were plenty of. And the rock crowd took over the club inside of a year. By 1980, it was a complete, full-blown metal club.
Awesome. And now, not many people might know this, but certainly the Lemur regulars did. You personally were one of the first DJs to start playing that type of music in Lemur. Talk about that. What were you listening to that inspired you to, wanted to, bring this music out to the forefront?
Well, I had originally been making a living spinning in dance clubs, but I was, when I saw the Beatles in 1965 on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I'm sort of showing my age now, but that was a turning point for me. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I wanted to be, and straight ahead from there, I was, born and raised on rock, a drummer, on the side of the hobby, and just kept going forward listening to that kind of music. At the time, it was a lot of European stuff going on. The Accept bands like Accept, Bodine, Samson, early Saxon, Diamond Head, stuff like that. Angel Witch, we were listening to that kind of stuff. We were basically fans. My friends and I, we were fans, and we went to the club on a Thursday night and hung out there and listened to the bands. And I had a record collection that was a collection that would make Eddie Trunk's hair stand up on the back of his head at the time. And that was playing disco at the club knew who I was, knew I had a huge metal collection, and I was a logical choice to take over the duties as a rock disc jockey. I knew the music inside out, and so he went off to open a club called the Brooklyn Zoo, and I took over the duties at the club and just jumped right in, spinning the metal at the time that I was listening to. Saxon, Bodine, Accept, Samson, early Maiden, and stuff like that. And the crowd responded. I mean, there were some dancers left over from the disco days who used to. The other disc jockey before me used to play dance music in between the rock bands, which I thought was totally incongruent.
Yeah.
And so we had sort of two crowds, and so to appease them, he sort of played this music that you could kind of do the two-step to, like L.A. Woman and the Clash and the Knack and stuff like that.
Right.
And when I got in behind the turntables, I started throwing on stuff like Maiden, and those people just disappeared really fast. And the takeover was complete. One to the back of the club and they said, we'd like to see if we could bring dance music back to the club in between the bands. And I said, you're making a mistake. There's no more dancers in the building.
Right.
But I said, let's try it out. Let's check it out and see what happens.
Sure.
And I knew this was going to be a disaster. So I don't remember what band it was, but after the band went off, I threw on Should I Stay or Should I Go, which is the famous Clash tune.
Yep.
The crowd started to growl like pissed off junkyard Dobermans. I mean, they knew who that was coming out of the speakers. They were not going to let that record finish.
Yeah.
But they would have come upstairs and lynched me, and I let that record play all the way to the end.
Oh,
so there was, before I got my head split open with twirling beer bottles, being thrown up at me. I pulled the album off the turntable and I held it up so that everybody saw it, and then I threw it frisbee style into the crowd, and they went nuts. They grabbed the record and smashed it to bits.
Oh.
And I got on the mic. I said, "You're never going to hear that kind of stuff in here again." And I threw on Sanctuary from Maiden.
Yes.
And instantly brought everybody back, fist waving and bed banging, and that was the end of it. I mean, and the owner of the club, who was standing over my shoulder, just was astonished. Mm-hmm. And he walked away without saying a word. And at that point, at that particular moment, the club was born. Right at that moment.
Sure, yeah, and it's kind of interesting that the transition happened that fast, and I kind of like what you guys were doing at the time as far as building on that metal versus disco, out with the old and with the new. I've seen. I was a little too young at the time, but I've been able to go to YouTube and check out some of those old commercials. Those are great. Talk a little bit about that. Were you behind any of that? Well, your voice was in some of those, right?
My voice was on some of the radio commercials and some of the television spots.
Okay.
But the TV commercial was made. That was actually one of the bartenders. He's the kid walking down the street with the boombox. Yeah. And the waitress is stringing him into the club, and he comes out a metalhead. He starts out as a disco guy, comes out as a metalhead. That was actually Joey, one of the bartenders who worked at the club. And I was there for the shooting. I wasn't involved in the video, but.
It's just a classic commercial, and it just kind of summed up what L'Amour was all about,
It really did. They played it on U68 all the time, which I think was one of the first cable channels ever born, I think.
Now, was it always, did it quickly transition into like a metal-only club, or, because I know that there was like a Thursday nights where you guys would do only metal. Was it always metal all the time, or did you guys just have like a couple days a week where you playing like...
Not always. Metal was predominant, but we had really a wide range of bands. I mean, we had cover bands in during the week, like Bystander, who did everything from Loverboy to Bruce Springsteen, and with a splash of Bon Jovi or whatever. And then there were bands like Phantom's Opera or Dreamer, who some of those members later on became White Lion and some other famous bands.
Cool.
And they were original acts that did their own original brand of hard rock with a metal kind of edge. So there was a little bit of everything. I mean, but the national acts that started to roll in the doors it was everybody from Skid Row and Poison, Faith No More, Warrant, Anthrax, Slayer, Rat, Megadeth, Stryper, Kicks, Guns N' Roses, Motorhead Extreme. So we had everybody. The Chili Peppers played there. King Diamond played there. So we really covered the whole spectrum. And at that point, I mean, metal was really all under one umbrella. I mean, it was all heavy metal. Before everything started to cross over and break up into thrash, hardcore, grindcore, black metal, death metal, and all that kind of stuff, there was no crossover at all in the beginning.
Right. Yeah, and I mean that was one of the coolest things I learned about when I found out about L'Amour, was that basically anybody who's been in metal has played at your club. I mean, it was just a mecca for what was going on at the time. I really want to talk specifically about the thrash metal scene, because L'Amour, probably more than any other place, was important to the thrash metal scene.
Yeah, that's true. The saying was, what came first, thrash or L'Amour? And everybody would argue about, it's kind of like a chicken and egg kind of thing.
Sure. Talk about some of the bands that started coming through there. I know everyone played there. Metallica, Slayer. Talk about some of those early shows.
Metallica, Slayer, Overkill. There was one particular show that put Metallica on the map on the East Coast, more or less. First time they played was '83 with Cliff Burton.
Yeah.
And I think they also did a show with Dave Mustaine in the band. And it was his last gig ever, the Metallica personnel was at L'Amour, and after that he
was that the show before he got kicked out? Because
it was the last show he played. Yeah, before he got kicked out was at Lemoore.
Wow.
And so we had bands like Nuclear Assault and Carnivore and Typo Negative and Hatebreed. Guys came in, Testament, Sepultura, Exodus, Striper. And Voivod was there. I mean, some of the bands played there were awesome. Slayer was always welcome. They always packed the place.
Sure.
It was. I mean, it really got over the years. As the metal sector of music sort of started to split up into factions, so did the nights at the club. I mean, we'd have nights with Agnostic Front, Propane, and Sick of It All, Candiria, and then Biohazard, Most Precious Blood, Sworn Enemy, guys like that. Were very important. Cro-Mags, Crumb Suckers were very important to the hardcore scene.
Yeah.
And later on, as the club progressed between the mid 80s into the 90s, all of those guys just sort of pushed all the heavy metal bands out of the way and took over the stage. And they soaked up all of the spotlight. I mean, Cro-Mags and guys like that.
Yeah.
And Biohazard and Typo Negative, they ruled after a while. I mean, the other guys were just kind of just shoved into the corner, more or less.
Well, that was their home area.
Right. They were all local acts, and the kids that came to see Twisted Sister, got out of the way, because there was this swirling, violent mosh pit in the middle of the building.
Yeah. That
wasn't there a few years before.
Sure. Yeah, we actually sat down and talked with Rick Ernst, who made the documentary Get Thrash, the story of thrash metal.
I just love that movie.
Oh, yeah, and Lemore is actually a big part of that movie. You see in that film just how special and important that club was to the thrash metal scene. What the message that I got from that, the bands really felt a sense of, security there, a sense of acceptance. It was people who liked them. Can you talk a little bit about that scene? What was that spirit like at the time? Because this was this new scene, and people hadn't seen this before, but it was accepted at a place like Lemoore.
Right. I think that one followed the other. I mean, the bands that started out there were radical to begin with. The metal bands that started there, and so the metal music as a whole got louder, faster, and crazier and rowdier. And so the music evolved that way, the crowd evolved that way, and then so there was a sense of camaraderie there, from the beginning, because it was the only place in the area where people like that could come and be among their brethren. And the hardcore people felt the same way when they came in there. I mean, it was the only place really for bands like that to really just let it all hang out and let the crowd go wild. And there was this whole controlled chaos kind of thing that was happening there, with the mosh pits and the crowd surfing and all that kind of stuff. So the camaraderie was great. I mean, fights were very, very rare in the beginning, and then later on it got to be a more frequent thing. But in the beginning, the camaraderie was something special, and it was something that you couldn't find anywhere else in the city, and anywhere else in the tri-state area, and even up and down the Eastern Seaboard. At this point, there were people coming to the club from Hammerheads in Baltimore. There were people coming to the club to see hardcore shows from as far away as Maine, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and they were making the trip like it was a trip to a corner convenience store. They were there all the time.
Yeah.
You just couldn't find that kind of spirit anywhere else.
It was such a cool part of the thrash metal history. I mean, here's this new scene of this new sound of music that has kind of taken kids by storm. I mean, you can equate it to like when kids first heard Elvis. I mean, there had to be a place and a time for them to experience this new emotion that they were feeling, and Lemore's was the place for them. And that was
it definitely was,
and that was what made it so special.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then reviews of the shows went worldwide, like a review of Exodus or Sepultura or Murphy's Law, for that matter, would wind up in Kerrang! Magazine, over in Europe. And before you know it, the club was known worldwide. I mean, it was, the amount of reviews that were showing up in magazines across the globe, people started to piece together on the other side of the world that this place is an epicenter for thrash metal.
Yeah.
And so it's, to this day, it's still held in high regard as as a shrine.
It's a part of the history.
As a mecca to the thrash metal scene that was practically born there.
Yes.
And if it wasn't born there, because that's arguable, it was definitely nurtured there.
Yes.
And made to thrive. And the crowd ate it up. Kids loved it. They absolutely enjoyed it. They came there every weekend. And after a while, you just congregated. Nobody called each other and said, I'm going to Lemoore tonight. Mm-hmm. They all just showed up, and you knew by default. All your friends were there. They were all there. And, from out over the DJ booth into the crowd, I could see everyone enjoying themselves. And, it made me a happy guy.
You had the best seat in the house. Exactly.
I did. I literally did.
Very cool. Now, talk a little bit about the the West Coast versus the East Coast scene, because you hear so much about the Bay Area, the Los Angeles scene, as far as being the focal points of the thrash metal scene. New York sort of gets forgotten about. That side of the country was just as important. And of course, Lemoore was the Mecca. Talk about some of those bands like Anthrax and Overkill. What did they mean to the spirit of the New York thrash metal scene?
Well, I think those guys, they were our flagship. They were our, the way Metallica is the San Francisco kind of West Coast kind of guys leading the charge. Yeah. Overkill and Typo Negative and Anthrax and Life of Agony. Those guys were the predominant bands in New York, and they were the flagship bands, kind of leading the charge from our end. So it was kind of, this one big giant, great big army, but the two factions leading the charge at the same time. I think that the major difference, I don't really think there's much of a difference between the people who enjoy the music. I don't think there's much of a difference between the people who enjoy the bands. But I think that the New York outfits are more street level kind of gritty kind of bands, and the California bands are more of the sort of teased and mascara makeup kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Metallica being an exception, but
yeah. I mean, not that I agree with that, but I mean, that's certainly the perception that you get. New York bands are tough bands. I mean, that's where hardcore came from.
Yeah, it is. I mean, these guys. They walked up in a pair of jeans and sneakers. All they wanted to do was plug their amps in, plug their guitars in, and turn their amps all the way up. They didn't give a crap about what they looked like.
No.
They didn't give a crap about getting girls. They didn't give a damn about anything. They just wanted to play. They wanted to inflict as much musical damage on that delighted crowd as possible. Mm-hmm. And for as long as possible, and for as loud as possible. They really didn't care about leather vests and rings and bracelets and getting your hair teased before going on the stage.
It was about the music.
It was all about the music for them, and certainly the crowd picked up on that. I mean, the crowd could relate because they were guys just like them. They were fans. Some of them had their own bands, and some of them were lucky enough to get to do their thing in Lemoore. They were guys that were big Typo Negative fans or Life of Agony fans or Overkill fans. Mm-hmm. They were in a band. Some of them were lucky enough to get a chance to open for those guys. Sure. You could do that here in New York, and you could do it at Lemoore. So
very cool
fans
stuff.
definitely related to it.
Absolutely, and that's what kept it going. I mean, if it wasn't for the fans, who knows? I mean, maybe the thrash metal fizzles out after a few years.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. So of all the thrash metal bands, that you saw in those early days, who really brought it when they came to Lemoore?
It's hard to say. There were so many really good shows, but I gotta say Slayer. Slayer really brought it to the crowd. I mean,
of course.
And then Biohazard.
Yeah.
Biohazard was so in your face. They were so in your face, and they were Brooklyn guys. Mm-hmm. So they were like, it's like, hey, it's like the guys down the block are playing. Tonight. Let's go see our friends. Yeah. So 90% of the club were friends with Biohazard. They all knew us. Biohazard, they were drinking in the back of the club before they even got their first gig. They used to hang out there.
Yeah, I mean, that was like we talked about earlier. That was their home crowd, and they were just amazing as a local live band.
Right. When they played, it was chaos, and I think that Armored Saint was pretty damn good. I mean, Armored Saint was a crowd pleaser. But I gotta say, overall, Slayer and Biohazard. Those guys, could whip the crowd up into a frenzy, and it was unreal.
real quick, talk about some of those early Slayer shows, because you hear that, you constantly hear how scared everyone was, and this crazy band who was coming out playing louder and faster than anybody. What was it like the first time you saw Slayer?
At first, I couldn't understand a word Tom Roy was saying, but after a couple of songs, and I was amazed at Dave Lombardo and Kerry King and the rest of the guys. I mean, they were just amazing musicians.
Yeah.
Of that, you could pick up on right away. And the crowd certainly knew who they were months and months before the band even showed up at the door. I mean, I was playing Slayer tunes long before the band showed up at the club.
Yeah.
And so they were certainly ready and raring to go when the Slayer buses rolled up. They were ready for it, and it was intense. Everybody knew the words to the songs. Everybody couldn't wait for Angel of Death. They couldn't wait for Rain and Blood, and when it happened, they were all standing on their heads. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, amazing, great stuff. So let's talk about the book now. You're getting ready to release this homage, this walk down memory lane with Lamore.
Yes, a time capsule, yeah.
Time capsule, yeah. And it's from what I've been seeing, from what I've been reading about it, it's going to have some great stuff. Tons of photos. A lot of fan contributions. It's a great. Like as you said, a time capsule from the people who are actually there. Why was it so important for you to do this?
I think that the story needs to be told. We were discussing earlier about the West Coast scene. I mean, there's a lot of stuff written about the West Coast scene and the bands as individuals, East Coast and West Coast and all over the world. There are books all over the place about the bands. There are some books about the West Coast scene. There's nothing about the East Coast scene, and I think that you mentioned a while ago that it was kind of forgotten about, and it was in a way. Nobody really paid attention to it. All of the high-class editors and photographers in New York were paying attention to the snotty punk scene that was going on in CBGBs.
Right.
Nobody cared about what was going on in Brooklyn. But Lamore had 1,500 kids in it every night, every weekend, for the better part of 10 or 15 years, and no one was paying attention.
Sure.
So I think that the story has to be told. I mean, the contributions that the club and the bands that played there have made overall to the metal scene is something that needs to be documented, and people need to read about it and enjoy reading about it.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's some great photos in there.
Yes.
Frank White, he was the photographer?
Frank White, who is a legendary photographer in his own right. I mean, started out as a fan at the club, just taking pictures of his favorite bands.
Yeah.
And what started out as a hobby turned into his professional career. It's 25 or 30 years later, and he's taken pictures of thousands of bands. Still doing that, still actively working as a photographer and has a photo agency. And he was the house photographer at Lamore for many years. And the core of the book represents his body of work at the club. And it's really an amazing body of work. Some of the pictures he took were just incredible.
I've seen some of the pictures online, and they are incredible. Yes. And like I said, it's a who's who of heavy metal, lore. I mean, everyone's in there. Slayer's in there, Judas Priest.
Everybody's in it.
Iron.
Slayer's in it. Maiden's in there. The Guns N' Roses, the Black Crowes, Bret Michaels, everybody that you could possibly name, with the exception of a few bands who actually never played the club. Motley Crue never played there, but they did hang out there. We have pictures of them.
Interesting.
Ronnie James Dio never played there, but there were only a handful of people who never made it to the stage. But we have everybody else. We've got them all. Yeah. We've got Typo Negative. We've got White Lion. We've got Kix. We've got Overkill. We've got Slayer in there, and some of the people who worked there and hung out there, and some of the local bands that played have contributed some stories and photos and ticket stubs as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of great stuff. I'm really excited to check it out when it does come out. When you were looking at some of those photos of the bands, what popped out as some of your favorite memories? Which photos can we see that kind of sum up what Lamore was all about?
Yeah, there's a few of them. Some of the White Lion shows and the Overkill shows were very memorable because the crowd was very much enthralled with those bands during the years that they were in the spotlight. White Lion was hugely popular. They were managed by the owners, and so that was when their album went gold, they had the whole ceremony on the stage, and that was a pretty special moment.
Very cool.
Queensryche stuck out, especially in my mind. The photographs of the Queensryche show, they came around, I think, right after the Warning EP, I think, was put out. virtually nobody knew who they were, but they were fantastic. I mean, maybe about, I don't know, maybe 300 or 400 people in the club, which in a building like that looks like it's empty.
Right.
Jeff Tate and the crew put on an awesome show, and it was before they became famous. And a lot of the shows I remember, like Guns N' Roses and the Black Crowes and Queensryche and Metallica, were before they became big, and so those memories are special to me.
Very cool. Now now L'Amour wasn't just about bands. I mean, you guys had some other types of fun there. You know, talk about what kind of other events would you see there? I think I heard you had. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We had some tattoo conventions there, and we had some. We had all kinds of stuff in this. Some silly stuff like sumo wrestling. And
the sumo wrestling was what I wanted to ask about.
We had Thursday nights for a while. It was crazy. It was just crazy. It's a million degrees inside one of those suits. I don't know if you've ever gotten into one. But my advice to you is do not do it. There is some video around of me sumo wrestling against one of the waitresses, and it's not very. Well, it's not something I want people to view.
Is it? That's not on YouTube, is it?
I would hope not. I hope not.
All right.
It probably is going to pop up somewhere.
Well,
we had wet T-shirt contests. We had air guitar contests, which were always a lot of fun.
The air guitar was something I wanted to ask about because that was something that the fans were doing. That it was something that started, I think, over in Europe, but it came over to the States, and that was a big part of what getting into the whole experience. Was it
really
how special was that to see?
It was fun because we were watching people do it just normally, hanging out in the club. Guys would lean up against the speaker and like whip into an Eddie Van Halen guitar solo while I was playing the record. And I always enjoyed seeing that. They play air drums to Neil Peart and Rush, and all that kind of stuff. So it was fun to watch that. And then when the contests happened, it was very cool because it was early air guitar contests, not the ones like you see now where it's like, it's what the guy's wearing. It's not really what he's doing. Or it's how much he jumps up and down, or if he does a somersault.
Sure.
Some of these guys didn't know how to play guitar, but if you watch their fingers move, it looked like they were guitar players.
Yeah.
That to me is an air guitar contest, not wearing a shiny leather vest and lipstick and standing on your head. That's not air guitar.
No.
So we got to see some of the real people who were like actually did that, and it was for them it was a borderline obsession, and they were very good at it. Some of them.
Well, and that just sums up about, how dedicated and loyal the fans were. I mean, like you said, the guy probably didn't play guitar, but he knew every note on that record, And
it looked like, and you could tell because it looked like he was hitting him.
Yeah.
He wasn't, but
it's one of the things I like to talk about, and I do like to ask the question, as far as metal goes, and as far as metal fans as a community, how important is it, as for the fans to kind of keep that movement alive, keep the spirit of metal alive, because you yourself are a fan, I mean, and you're. You're still you're a metal dude, you're a DJ, and you're a legend in your own right. You're still doing it. Why is it important to you to be a fan?
It's important for me to be a fan because I was born that way. I mean, I am the real thing. I live, breathe, eat, and crap rock and roll.
Yes.
It's in my blood.
Yeah.
And so it's something that I'm compelled to do almost. I mean, it's almost like a call of duty, if you will. That's who I am, and I think that resonates with a lot of people. It's who they are. Mm-hmm. It's a totally different thing than like growing your hair, say growing a ponytail the length of a matchstick and throwing on a Led Zeppelin white Peter shirt and walking around in a club. You know what I mean? It's two different things.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm dead without it.
Exactly.
And a lot of fans are dead without it. I mean, they'll die. It's a lifeblood. It's almost part of their living, breathing apparatus. And so for us, it's second nature. Second nature to keep it alive.
So cool. Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about, is the fans. And I did want to talk a little bit about the fans because I know that you've been sort of soliciting fan contributions for this book.
Yes, I have. We're trying to catch everybody.
How's that going, and what are some of the types of things that you're getting from the L'Amourons, as they were called?
Yes, they were called. Affectionate to the term of endearment, actually.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it is. We've had some really cool stories from people who come to the club whether they came regularly or people who came there only once. And even if you came there once, you wound up with a special story. So like one guy came once, he wound up talking to Cliff Burton outside the club. Unbelievable, something than he ever expected to happen. Other guys came, they got their tires slashed, or they got their windows smashed, their radio was taken out, that kind of thing, because they're all with Brooklyn.
Exactly.
Other people, got drunk and like missed their train stop and woke up in Maine, that kind of thing. So we get these crazy things, and there was one story that sticks out in my head about a kid who was in the middle of a crowd, and I believe he was watching. I'm not sure if it was Iron Maiden, who played a show under the name Charlotte and Hollis. They did a secret show at the club.
Oh, very cool.
Or if it was not Anthrax, or if it was Slayer. But he turned around, and Anthrax was moshing right next to him.
So cool.
And so he jumped into the pit with them, and it's like, where can you do this? I mean, where else can you find Anthrax moshing in the pit with you on a Friday night? Only in Lemoore, only in Brooklyn, something like that would happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you gotten any strange items or, strange pieces of memorabilia that somebody,
That's a very odd story that I'm not sure I'm going to put in print. But we had some, most of the memorabilia is some of the stuff I had long forgotten, like Iron Maiden, when, as I mentioned before, did a show called under the name of Charlotte and the Hollis. It was a secret show. Even though they would do it Madison Square Garden that weekend, even though it was a secret show, shows sold out in 10 minutes. That's how aware the crowd was of what was going on.
Yeah.
So, and they made a special shirt, Charlotte and the Hollis blew my brains out of Lemoore, that kind of thing. And so, the stuff like that is very cool to see, and there are dedications on the Somewhere in Time album by Iron Maiden. If you look at the cover behind Eddie, there's a sign that says Lemoore Beer Garden. So there are little things like that, and live recordings like the Slayer clip live at Lemoore that was in the movie. Stuff like that is special memorabilia that sometimes is forgotten. It slips your mind after time, and to see it again is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we're going to get a chance to see it, and it's so cool that you're taking the time to put this together, because as you said earlier, it is a story that needs to be told. It's a special part of American rock and roll history. Just like any of the other famous clubs. It is a
unique part of New York history and metal history, and a unique part of Brooklyn history.
Yeah, very cool.
So
now, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's 5 years in the making. So yeah, it's been a juggernaut, but it's finally light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, yeah, I mean it's your labor of love. So like I said, we're looking forward to it. Now, I know you're working with Ian Christie to put some of this stuff together.
Yes, Ian Christie was instrumental actually in getting Frank White and I together. Ian had written an article on Lemoore for Mass Appeal magazine around 1995, I believe it was, somewhere around there. I had read the article and was really excited about it. And I had always wanted to do it on the club. I was always had that in the back of my head that someday I'm going to write all this stuff down and tell the story. And I decided it was time. It was around 2005, and I got in touch with Ian, and he said, well, I'd love to help you guys out. I was a Lemoore fan myself.
Yeah.
And he said, Frank White's been looking to put together a book. I was like, Frank White, I know him. He was the photographer at the place.
Yeah.
So he hooked us up, and he actually got the wheels rolling and, put some of the fuel into the machine that is now the Lemoore book.
Very cool. I mean, that's cool how that happened. I've seen Ian in a lot of interviews, and we're actually going to be doing an interview with him ourselves. That's going to be on the site in a little bit. So
fantastic. He's a great guy, and he's a bona fide heavy metal historian. I mean, the guy's a walking encyclopedia.
Yeah, absolutely.
He really is. He's an amazing guy. Very cool guy.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about when can we expect the book to be out?
Should be out in about 8 to 10 weeks. It's called Rock Capital of Brooklyn. It will be available at LemooreBook.com, and also will be available on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com.
Okay. And I know you're on Facebook for sure. Where else can fans follow you and get information about it?
Facebook page. It's called Lemoore Book, and it is a person kind of page, not anything where you can click like. It's an actual person.
Yep.
Like if Lemoore is the first name and Book is the last name, because we wanted to be able to talk to people on a personal basis, on a personal level. So they can go to the Lemoore Book page on Facebook and friend us if they'd like to make a contribution. We're looking for ticket stubs and pictures of people hanging out at the club, and if they want to send in a memory or two, we'd be more than happy to put it in the book.
Very cool. And so tell what's the state of Lemoore today? I know that the club closed down for a short period of time, but then reopened at another location. Is that correct?
It had a series of fits and starts. It I did was Rob Halford and Fight, and then Typo Negative, and then Thin Lizzy were the last three bands, I think, to play the club in '05. Then it reopened on Staten Island as the same owners, smaller building, much smaller building on Staten Island. We did a Lemoore reunion party, and drew a lot of people. People came from all over the place, and they decided to start doing some rock shows again. And it was only open for a couple of years. It's been closed now since December of '09. But we did have some really good shows at the Staten Island Club. We had Anvil there. We had Carnival. We had Biohazard. That's before Pete Steele passed away. One of Pete Steele's last shows.
Yeah.
And a few other really good bands. Zebra played there, and so we had some pretty good shows. But unfortunately, it just didn't pan out. It was too small of a place to really bring large acts in. We really couldn't do the same kind of thing we could do in the Brooklyn Club with a much bigger room.
Sure.
So it's been closed since December '09, and I don't think we're going to see another incarnation. I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, it's cool that, like I said, it's cool that you're kind of writing this, this acknowledgement of, this important piece of history. Now you're still a DJ. I mean, you're still a very focal part in the rock and roll scene in New York. You DJ at several clubs. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. I work in the city in New York. I also work in Brooklyn. I work in Staten Island, and I rotate around a couple of different clubs. And I also work in New Jersey as well. A place called the Brighton Bar in New Jersey. That bar's been around for the better part of 25 years too. It's mostly a punk rock club, but we do metal shows there. And I have a production company called Rock Machine that produces live original metal shows in the tri-state area. So, and I also sometimes DJ at those shows if I have the time. So, very dedicated to keeping the spirit alive and presenting the newer acts out there. There are a lot of great acts out there doing metal nowadays. You have Diablo Royale, and you have ZO2, and you have Blackwater Rising. You have the Deadlies. You have some of these wonderful bands out there that are new guys. They're playing fresh music, but it's metal. It's undeniably hard rock or heavy metal, and those guys are the new bastions. They're the guys that are carrying the flagship now for us for the newest scene, for the younger kids, because it just keeps going.
Sure.
Keeps going. There was a little bit of a lull there when Kurt Cobain came around with the sledgehammer and single-handedly just got rid of all the mascara guys in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
And then the scene was quiet for a while, but it's come back with a vengeance over the past 10 years.
Yeah.
You see that. You're there. You're living through it. So
yeah.
Those bands, the newer guys like Blackwater Rising, Diablo Royale, ZO2, guys like that are those are the guys that are going to be the future.
Great.
So.
Well, you heard it from Alex Kayne here first, folks, and he knows what he's talking about. In all seriousness, Alex, I mean, I love what you do. You're keeping the spirit alive.
Thank you, so are you, my friend. I appreciate that.
Hey, you know what? I mean, if it wasn't for guys like you, there wouldn't be a Lemoore. There wouldn't be a thrash metal scene. There wouldn't be, people have fond memories of that era and still live it and breathe it today. And it was guys like you that started it for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was one of the first metal DJs in New York City, and I was the first guy ever to spin Metallica, Maiden, Anthrax, Typo Negative, Y&T, Motorhead, LA Guns, White Lion, Wasp, Sepultura, you name it, I spun it, and I spun it before anybody else did in New York. So,
that's something that you definitely need to be proud of. I mean, that's an amazing story. And you're a legend. And I love those guys. It's about the fans who keep the spirit alive and keep going.
Yeah, it's all about the music too. I mean, that's the thing. Like I said, that keeps us going, man. It's our lifeblood. Yeah. I hear music. I'm a happy guy.
Exactly. I feel the same way. There's so many people out there who feel the same way that you do, and it's cool to see what you're doing, man. So I appreciate it. And
thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you guys do at the Sludge Factory. Yeah, baby.
You got it, man. Well, looking forward to that book coming out.